Said, stand back, boys. I'll put your fire out. Well, he just opened the flap on that tent, and he threw a 3-gallon bucket of gasoline into a tent. It was about, I'd say 16 foot square. And I'm telling you, they's the damnedest freakers you ever seen. That tent just literally took off like a balloon. It pulled the stakes out of the ground, and the tent and all went probably 25 feet right straight up in the air. And the next thing you could notice, you could hear tinkle, 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 and it was the eyelets, the metal parts of the tent falling back to earth. And they called the fire department. And there was a colored fire department came over there. But hell, it wasn't nothing but the smoking ground when they got there. I believe we could have put the fire out if it hadn't been for that damn fool with the gasoline. Oh, dear. We really had time there. Now, see, I'll have to think of something else. Oh, yeah. While we were there, the word come back and said, well, boys, you just have to stay here. They've got a maritime strike in New York. And that just really upset us because we'd been home, away from home for a year and a half or so, and some of them guys had been away from home 4 or 5 years. We just had busted our butt over there day and night trying to get this war over with and get back home. And here these damn people that they'd had to work hard, no doubt, there on the docks. Well, they was just wanting more money. They wasn't worried about getting us home. So they come around with the petition, and all the officers brought around and asked us guys if we would be willing to work on the docks or whatever it took to keep the ships running. And every one of us signed up, and I knew we would work just to get a chance to get across the ocean. And once we got to New York, they might not have ever been able to catch us. But we got a chance of that, and I think I signed 2 petitions. But finally they got their mess settled, and we went down to, we went into oh yeah, that reminded me, we went into a little beer joint, I guess you'd call it, there in Marseille. Now, I've been in a few damn places that was rough. I mean rough. And we walked in there. We had to step over a guy that had just been shot. And you talk about unfriendly. By God, they was unfriendly in there. And we each had an old pistol. And I told this guy I was with, I said, back to back and pull your guns out. We're going out of this damn place backwards. That's the only way we got out of there. We walked back to back with a pistol out and got the hell out of that place. Now I've been in German towns that was still occupied by some of the meanest damn troops in the world, and they wasn't as bad as that tavern. Boy, I'm telling you, you could really get killed quick. And you could get killed in more than one way, like a club or a knife, or, oh dear, or get shot. There's a mean damn bunch of people. Of course, that Marseille is a sailor's town anyway, and there's a lot of them old French sailors, and the French they're just a different bunch of people to start with. Anyway, but we got down there a few days later and walked up the gangplank, and of course they assigned us to where we was going before when we were out on the dock, and I'll be damned if I didn't draw F deck A compartment. That's about 2 decks below the water line, right up in the bow of the ship, right up in the V. And that's the way I went over, and that's the way I came back. Oh, the walls was sweating, and we finally pulled out of there with the tide, and it was just a beautiful time. I believe it was the 22nd of November. And there was some moon. I don't remember now just what phase the moon was in. But we started out there that afternoon. And I said to one of the sailors, I said, boy, this Mediterranean is really a beautiful sea. And he told me how many times he'd been on it. And he said, this is the first time I've ever been on it when it was just this calm. He said, it's usually just choppy and standing on end and jumping up and down and roaring almost. He said, you'll change your pace once you get through the Straits of Gibraltar. So I stayed up all night. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. We went through the Straits. Then I went back down and went to bed, slept a little bit. And he was right. My gracious. By the next afternoon, that Atlantic Ocean was just standing on end, and that old ship just jerking and jumping and shuddering and carrying on. And we got into Pier 88, New York, on December the 1st. And the captain of the ship told us, he said, I'm going to run it, I believe it was 2 knots faster. It was supposed to cruise at 17 knots, and he turned her up to where he could run 19 knots. And he said, that'll get me in there the last day of November, because I want to go to the Army-Navy football game. I guess it was in New York or something there. But we hit a terrible storm. I don't know now. I think it lasted 5 or 6 days. Anyway, it was so bad that we couldn't eat our Thanksgiving dinner. We just they passed out sandwiches. And once the sea began to break, the storm began to break then we had our Thanksgiving dinner. And just before the storm hit real hard, we kept a strict eye on them damn swabbies. And here come an old sailor down through there, had a great big roll of clothesline rope, and the other one had hammer and nails. And they stopped in a little office right there in a compartment. There was about two decks above us. And this one was toe-nailing this little table to the floor. They had a wooden deck in this area. And the other one was taking some rope, and he was tying a typewriter to the desk. I said, the hell are you guys doing? He said, oh, getting ready for a little blow. My God, they had that right. 70-mile-an-hour winds. We was just, I'm telling you, that old ship done everything but turn over. And I think the breaking point on that ship was 43 degrees. And the captain, every once in a while, when we really hit a hell of a swell, he'd tell us how many degrees we went. And several times we went 40 and 41. And boy, she'd just shudder to hang there, and she'd come back down. And a time or two, I know, it was taking water through the portholes in B deck. So you know she had to be laying way over. And me and Rutherford, and I'm not sure whether there was anybody else with us or not, but I told him, I said, hell, let's don't stay down here in this old hole. Let's go up on deck. And we would go up in the bow. And we would time it. When the ship would go up, start up, and the water's running off the deck, we would run to the very bow of the ship. And when it went under, it actually go down in underneath the ocean, the water wouldn't get into where we were standing or where we were sitting, you know. So we just rode out there, and you just look back and you see a big wall of green water, my goodness. And we would just stay there all day long because it just beat being panned up down there in that hole about 25 feet below water all the time. it was really a trip. I'm telling you. We finally got into, well, when we were there, crossing, crap games. Oh, you can't imagine the crap games that we had. I've seen lots of times, just lots and lots of times, a guy just lay $1,000 down, and he said, shoot 1,000. Another guy said, shoot, you're faded. And then on the side, the guy'd say, I got 500, says, when he makes his point, he won't make it. Well, he'd roll them, maybe he'd come up with a 6, and that guy, he'd lay his 500 down, and you know, that's the way to bet. Guy hardly ever makes his point. He always sevens out. Anyway, I've seen a guy take the dice once. He laid 1,000 down, and he rolled snake eyes. He laid 1,000 down, and he rolled snake eyes. And then he rolled, he just had $800 left. He laid that down, and he lost that. He rolled boxcars. So he crapped out 3 times in a row. There's no way you can beat that crazy game. I just wouldn't fool with it. I wandered around and talked with the crew and seen what they was doing, but they would never let me down in the engine room. That's where I wanted to go so bad. But we pulled into Pier 88, and most of the crew that we had bringing us back was, young sailors. I think they was, well, they wasn't Boy Scouts, but there's an organization that's Sea Scouts, I guess that's what you'd call them. I don't think there's one in the bunch that shaved. There was a couple old timers that was kind of keeping them going. And we pulled up that Pier 88, and it took them over 2 hours to get us tied up to the pier. Them guys couldn't even tie a knot. They'd get the rope around the pier, and then when they would wrap it around, they just wrapped the rope around in a crazy manner, and it just smoked and away from the dock we'd come. And they finally got us up there. The old chief, he'd hollered at him till he just wore out. His voice was going. And then they tried to put up the gangplank. They dropped that about 3 or 4 times. And they'd pick it up with a hoist, and they'd put it up again, and the ship would pull out. Oh, my goodness. And them guys with tugboats, they just about give up on us. But we finally got anchored, and we started off of there. And, oh, that was so pleasant. We come down through the piers there, and there stood the Red Cross, and they was up passing out milk and candy bars, and every damn thing they had would have been donated by some labor union or some other organization. I never known the Red Cross to give anybody anything, only a bunch of crap. And we got on through there. It was too late for the football game due to that storm, you know. And we got on the train and went to Camp Kilmer. And once we got into Camp Kilmer, they took us to big barracks, and they had us go draw bedding. We drew bedding, and by the time we got the beds and the mattresses and everything and all set up, we didn't have any blankets, I don't think. They said chow, and we went to chow. And that was, I guess, on the 1st of December. So they announced over at the mess hall that all incoming troops like that should go to the phone exchange and call home. So by then it was about 7 o'clock, I guess, 6:30 or 7 time. It's me and 2 other guys was buddying together, and we went to phone exchange. And I think I was the first guy to call, and my call went through. I didn't get it through till about 9 or 10 o'clock. And then one of the other guys, he called, and the last guy called, and I believe that was Montana, someplace up in there. And it was 6 o'clock the next morning. Well, we'd spent 12 hours in that damn telephone exchange making 3 calls. And we went right back over to mess hall and eat. And then we went back to the barracks, and they said they left to go someplace else and turn in a certain portion of your equipment, you know, like your pack and shovel and canteen or something such as that. And then you had to go get some shots. And then the next day they lined us up, and we had to turn in our beds and some more medical stuff, I believe it was, and go down to the depot and line up for a train trip. And I was getting pretty damn tiresome, you know. And time we got in here to Camp Atterbury, I'd slept on the train a little. And we got into Camp Atterbury. My goodness, I was getting tired. And we got discharged about 9:30, the night of December the 6th. And I think they give me $1.50 travel pay from Atterbury to Morgantown. That was 14 miles, 15 miles, something like that. Made it in. Boy, I would just give out. I really was tired. But we'd been traveling and on the roads and and I mean traveling like a hog, or worse than a hog. Just traveling ever since about the 22nd of November, and that was the 6th of December. Damn, I would just give out. I couldn't make a trip like that anymore. I just couldn't do it. It'd just be too much, but boy, it was really great to get home. Jim, he had grown so much. He was 19 months old. That simply just looked so good. I was so nervous and jumpy. Just couldn't hardly get around to get along at all. And then the next, I don't know, I think 2 days later, we borrowed a car and went to Columbus to get me some work clothes. Maybe it was the next day, I'm not sure. And I seen a wreck down there on 31, guys were laying there bleeding and going on, and I'm telling you, I just went all to pieces. After all that tracking around in blood and whatnot, I just couldn't cut her. But that was a long, hard trip. Now I'm going to have to think up something else. Well, I just happened to think of Thanksgiving dinner. I may have told this sometime on another tape, but Thanksgiving dinner on board ship. The sea was still very, very rough. And a lot of men were just, by God, I mean, just sick. If you'd have said, if you jump overboard, you'll feel better, they'd have jumped overboard. That seasickness is terrible. Anyway, they were serving dinner. And I think it was me and Ruthford. We was lucky. As we come down the chow line, it was giving us turkey and ham and dressing and mashed potatoes and green beans and a piece of ice cream, like an ice cream bar. I mean, they just really give us all out, you know, hot biscuits and coffee. And we just swung right out of the chow line, and the first table we come to was right next to the chow line. And there was three 12th Armored Division tank drivers facing the chow line. That put our back to the chow line. And you tell them guys they weren't too healthy. They were kind of green. Well, the guy on the end of the chow line had drug him up a garbage can there. He was kind of leaning on that, and he was passing out the spoons. That was his job. But he'd pass out maybe 25 spoons, and then he'd lift the lid on that garbage can, and boy, I mean, he'd just give it what for, you know. He'd just throw up and gag and go on. Well, I said to Rutherford, I said, "Would you like to have some extra ice cream?" He said, "Hell yes." Well, I said, "I know how we can get some." I said, "I'm going to keep my eye on that guy passing out them spoons. Next time he starts puking, I'm going to bring it to them tankers' attention." Well, sure enough, boy, he grabbed the lid on that, and he was just hanging in that. And I said to them tankers, I said, "Look at that old boy puking over there." I got down to the end of that. They couldn't eat another damn bite, and they just dropped their spoon and took off. They was sick. And I said, "Hell, looky there. That's one or two of them hadn't even touched their ham, you know. We got their ham and all the extra green beans and everything else and their ice cream. Boy, we really had a feast." And them guys that just cussed us said, "You damn medics, did you put up with any kind of stuff?" And I said, "Well, it's just a matter of getting used to it, I guess." But we'd go down in a latrine. Oh, my gracious. I ain't never been in a place dirty in my life. Had drains all the way around one edge. You just urinated against the wall, and it just kind of a little trough there on the floor, and it just bunched up and run on out, you know. Well, there's never less than 15 or 20 guys urinating at one time, because they had 8,800 of us on that damned old ship. And the urinals drain would get stopped up. Well, they had water running in that down the wall all the time. And I got it wouldn't be long till you'd have a wave. They'd go across that old boat when it would list from one side to the other. It'd be 2 feet high. And I was down there shaving one night, and I seen the only way I could keep 1 foot halfway dry, I had to put 1 foot in the wash basin. And when that tide had come in there, I'd just draw up my other foot, you know. Oh, what a terrible way. And then we go over into the other part of the latrine where God be sitting there on the throne, and it'd be, I think that pipe was about 20 plus feet long, and it had about at least 10 openings on it. It had 10 places where a guy could sit down, maybe more. And it was like an 8 or 10 inch pipe, and this was just a piece of crockery bolted to that pipe, and they had water running in it all the time. And just pumped it right on out in the ocean. Well, that's kind of funny. Had them all just about filled up, but the one up on the top end. So we grabbed a big wad of toilet paper and set fire to the damn toilet paper, stuffed it that hole. Boy, you talking about scorching a guy's butt. Hell, they was jumping up and down and hollering and going on. But we just done everything like that. We just ornery as hell. Just do any damn thing to break up the monotony. Oh, if the guy didn't like it and he wanted to fight, that's still all right. You know, just have a round right there. Oh dear, we just had the best time. And down in the hole when we sleeping in them bunks, there was just a pipe frame with a piece of canvas laced to it. And oh dear, they could fold them up. They had chains on each end, kind of like a porch swing that supported them. An old timer told me, he said, "Don't ever get any lower than the middle." He said, "If there's like 7 bunks high, don't get any further down than the 4th one." He said, "If you can at all, get the very top bunk." Well, that's what I always done. I got the top bunk. That way you was close to light. You could lay there and read. And if you was any further down than that, when anybody got sick and threw up, he'd throw up on the ones adjacent to his bed, plus the fact that it hit the floor and splatter on both sides, you know. Oh dear, you can't imagine how it is down in a hole like that. They talk about these damn prisoners being all upset because there's 2 to a cell. Hell, as big as a prison cell was, we'd have 18, 20 men in a place no bigger than that. And goodness, it just gets plumb raunchy. I've seen it. The ventilating system never worked half the time, and when you look towards the light, it'd just be blue with humidity off of people's breath, and the fact that by being below the water line, it was so cold down in there that the walls, I guess they'd call it the bulkheads, they just sweat all the time. Water just running every place. Just really wasn't too damn healthy down in there. Oh, and to get into some awful messes. Well, I better think of something else. You know, I think one of the hardest things to take when a guy was in the service was to see a real close buddy go down, and I don't know why, but a guy used to call him a son of a bitch. You know, he'd just be giving him hell for getting hit, maybe getting killed, but it wasn't meant that way. It was just, I think, thought it was just grief-stricken and saddened so, and so mad, not really at him, but at the fact that somebody had really put the tag on him. I think that's what upset a guy more than anything. And the fellow we got to have real strong bonds with one another, because when you're working with a man in this situation and you get really in a bind, in a place that's so bad that if you don't stay where you're at, you're going to get killed. And then your buddy comes and gets you. Now, he's made it, and I think that's why the reunions are so great, because you meet men that have offered you their life, and you have likewise offered them your life to use any way they can. And I think with a situation like that, it just really makes a very, very close bond. It's just, you just can't describe it. A person's involved in a situation like that. And we were always in some kind of a dreadful situation where you just tooth and nail and claws and whatnot. You just had to rely on one another. It was teamwork, and yet sometimes there wasn't enough left to be a team. But there was two of you. You was in it together. As it looks like this is going to be not too much more of it left. And like we always said, this situation is just like flying an airplane. Like God, you ain't down till you're in the ground. And we always covered one another. Anybody needed any money, we didn't have much, but whatever we had, if another guy got a chance to go, say for instance, a trip to Paris or something, you'd empty your pockets. Here, just now, this will be some tales of Camp Howes, Texas. One time we were on a march right on the banks of the Red River, and we had to walk across a footbridge. Well, it was a log, really, across the rather narrow, well, about a 20-foot ditch. And we were going more than one guy at a time, just like walking on a utility pole. And Bob Gibson fell off, and he landed on dry sand, which was very deceiving. It was quicksand, and he fell in almost to his armpits. And the rest of us began to scurry around, getting our packs off and forming a chain out of pistol belts. We threw the foot to him, and he got it in under his arms, and it took about 5 or 6 of us to pull him out. And in that, basically in that same area, a few months later, a Jeep and 2 men came up missing. And party went out finally looking for them. They kind of suspected maybe they'd got into some quicksand, driving in the dark. And the river wouldn't just run with a solid river bank. It had places along the bank that were like a little canyon. It'd go back maybe 40, 50 feet. And these men were running along there, not at any great speed, and they just ran into one of these little cracks, or little channels, and there was no tracks on the other side, and the sand was dry when the search party found them, and they had some poles that they'd got about 25 feet deep, as far as they could go, and they never could feel anything. So they just assumed that those Jeep and those 2 men were dead, because they were Jeep tracks leading into that, but nothing leading out. That and the gumbo mud and the hazards of sand and pear cactus, and they had a snake called a ground moccasin. It looked like a rattlesnake, only it was real dark brown, or well, like a copper, real dark, dirty copper color. And I later found out we have the same thing here in Indiana, and it's not of any great numbers, called the Massasauga. I don't know of any other name for it, only the rattleless rattlesnake. One time during the summer of 43, it's hot, and we ran through with 2 or 3 officers, and we got this one guy I was telling you about. It was down at Elizabeth, Louisiana, and we were giving him the treatment of talking about sex, you know. He'd just been newly married. Well, he was just new into the outfit at this point. His name was Craig C. Wales, nose, throat, and ear specialist. And one of the boys in the barracks went on sick call. He had a terrible ear infection. So he punched a hole in both of his eardrums. And that night, sitting on the footlocker playing blackjack, he was smoking, and every once in a while when he would laugh or something such as that, you could see smoke come out of his ears. That looked to us a little so funny. But then later on, we were on, I think what they call D series. It was just a form of field maneuver, field problem. And we were going into an area called Black Hollow, written on the map as such. And I asked him, I said, where do you want the aid station? Of course, I was driving the Jeep and had the trailer with the aid station in it. Well, he said, right down there in that flat place, in that holler. Well, really, it wouldn't have been a very good place, because if it had rained, it had washed us away, but he didn't pay attention to that. And this hollow was just like a canyon, and it had walls on it. It was just almost vertical. And I said, my, Captain, that's almost straight up and down. He said, so what? These Jeeps will go any place. Drive it in there. Well, I set the brake on the trailer, and I started down in there, and it was really frightening just to drive a Jeep straight down. And just before we hit the bottom, I pushed my foot to the floor on the throttle, and the bumper actually hit. But the wheels had just enough traction that it straightened out a little bit because the trailer was going to fall in on top of me. And then I knew after I got down in there that I had one hell of a problem, was to try to get out. So after I unloaded the trailer and got the tent set up and the aid station and everything, I immediately started to try to get a way out of there. And I could only make it about halfway up and I'd fall back in. And wasn't making any headway at all. But I had some rope with me, some 1-inch hay rope. And so I cut down a pole that was about 10 feet long, pretty substantial pole. And I tied that across the back of the Jeep. And then I placed 5 or 6 men, all I could get, onto that pole on just one side. And of course I was sitting on that side too in the Jeep. And I started out of there sideways at a rather steep angle. And by just sliding down the hill and spinning and four-wheel drive, I finally worked my way out of there. But if I hadn't had the extra counterbalance weight to hold it on, we would have never made it out. And then after we got out, well, I just kept it out. I camouflaged the Jeep on the outside. But then when it come time to get the trailer out, I had to pull it out with the rope and almost failed to pull the trailer up that embankment. But I thought right then we were in for it got a dumb officer like that. But I found out that that was one of his better judgments. Anytime we were driving around on that reservation, I always had my eyes open for anything that I could steal that would help the boys. You know, like I knew just about where every well was on that whole 500,000 acres, I guess. Of course, that's not much in Texas, you know. You wouldn't have to know where 2 or 3 wells are at, but nearly every well in the area was functional. And we'd been without water for 3 full days, and by God, we was really hurting. And I knew where a well was within a mile of us, but I couldn't get the Jeep. I tried every way in the world to figure out some way I could borrow the Jeep. I was going to go get 4 or 5 cans of water. So I think there was 3 or 4 of us just took off walking after dark. And we went over there, and we had just got there and had drank our fill when we heard the Jeep a-coming. And it was the captain, and he'd got somebody to drive him over there. I think old Geronimo drove him over, because Geronimo, he was another driver. He knew where everything was at, too. And the captain said he was going to have us court-martialed while he was a-drinking. Well, that'd have been all right. He could have court-martialed us, and then we would have court-martialed him for disobeying his own orders. But then one night, during one of these series, I think we'd been on the move for something like 20 days, day and night. They always make you dig holes all night and work you all day, so you never could get any sleep. The guys were just completely exhausted, and we fell out. And we're going down a little fire break, and parked the old Jeep under some scrub oak, put out the camouflage net, and just bedded down. And we could hear an old Dodge ambulance coming along, and they had a peculiar sound all their own with the fan to cool the radiator. It was making a special hum, you know. And the old truck was just humming along there, running in first gear. And all at once, we heard some guy scream. Oh, it's a terrible scream. And we could hear those old squeaky brakes when the driver applied them. Doors open and shut, going on. And we heard some guy said, "God damn you, you run over me." And this guy was asleep in the road. And he'd run one of those big old 916 ambulance tires right over that guy's head and shoulder. Well, it was sandy right in the road, and that's all that really saved him. It just kind of pushed his head and other shoulder down in the dirt. And of course, there was a lot of just unkind things being said. They was calling one another son of a bitches, and I figured if a guy could cuss and carry on like that, he wasn't hurt too bad. But they opened the door and they throwed his ass in the back of the ambulance, and away they went. And well, the next day he was come back to the company about noon from the hospital, and he just started to get black and blue, and he had that old Goodyear non-skid army tread marks all over his head where he was getting black and blue. He's kind of funny looking, but it's nice to look at anyway. Could have killed him if he'd been out there on some of that old hard dry gumbo. He'd just been the same as been in blacktop. It would have popped his head. And then we had let's see, I was thinking of it there a minute ago, another little story we had during this same time. Got a call on the radio, a man's been snake bit. Well, the captain got on the radio and he said, what kind of a snake? The guy said, the hell, we don't know. He's just been snake bit. And he said, well, get him over to the aid station. And we told him where we were at. And so they had a driver and a lieutenant and the guy that was snake bit. The guy that was snake bit he was riding in the back seat, and the lieutenant in the front seat, and the driver. Well, they started through that tall Johnson grass, and some of it had run from 4.5 to 8 foot or better tall. And they was just letting that old Jeep hum coming through the field. And they hit a piece of gyp rock that was sticking up out of the ground about 3.5 feet high. I run about 50 miles an hour, and it just tore both axles out from under that poor little old Jeep and turned them a flip-flop, broke the lieutenant's arm and leg, damn near killed the driver, and the guy that was in the back seat that was snake bit must have thrown him 50 feet and just rolled him through a great big patch of that old pear cactus. And when he got into the aid station, my God, he must have had 2,000 holes in him. He didn't know where in the hell he'd been snake bit. And there's the lieutenant. We had to go get him. He's all broke up. The Jeep driver's got his chest crushed and mashed, and one Jeep tore up. And I still never got to treat that guy for snake bite. But that seemed like the way it went sometimes. You just didn't know what was going to happen next. Then we was on guard one night. We had a guy in the outfit by the name of Clyde Pickens. And old Jesse Woodson came by and woke him up. He said, Clyde, you're on guard duty. Old Clyde didn't say nothing. Well, Woodson, he really shook him. Woodson was the corporal. And he got old Clyde awake, and he said, Clyde, you're on guard duty. Well, old Clyde, when he'd get real aggravated, he'd speak real high tone. And he said, well, I know goddamn well I ain't. And that was one thing amongst us, that when anything went a little bit wrong or something, why, they'd always say, well, I know goddamn well I ain't. And that was just one of those things that you don't ever think it'll happen, but it just happened some way or another. Let's see, I'll have to think of something else. Out around a little place called Marysville, there was what's later turned out to be a stone quarry. But back in them days, I don't know what it was, kind of like a gravel pit, I guess, and there was a big bluff in the area. There was about, I expect, 40 feet plus. So they lined us up in regular formation, 3 abreast, and marched us off of that bluff all one afternoon. My God, you can't imagine going along there just at a cadence of about 105, jumping off a building. I got them guys in front of you still in the damn way, you know, you're going to fall right on top of them or something. And they couldn't get up and get out of the way down there, and it's just like pouring gravel. There was a lot of guys hollering and screaming. They broke their arms. Some had broke their legs. Some had their head all mashed. Some guys had just fall in on top of them, you know, and get hit with rifle butts and everything else. And they'd done that all one afternoon, so they had about half of the outfit in the hospital. And then we quit that. I know one time there was a guy by the name of Tyler. He was a Jeep driver. And myself, they called us into headquarters. And they showed us on the map where a platoon of men were at. They got a call on the radio. And these people, they're supposed to have had 2 or more people with broken legs. And they wanted us to get out there on the double. And I said to the officer, I said, you mean faster than 35 miles an hour? And he said, as fast as it'll run. Well, 35 miles an hour was the speed you had to drive, at least when somebody's looking at you. Well, me and old Tyler took off, and I was leading. Well, it was 32 miles cross country. And thank God you're just kind of shooting a shot in the dark, you know. We made the 32 miles in 45 minutes. And that ain't ready to be sneezed at. That's even pretty good time if you're on blacktop. But I was leading, and we came right into a box canyon. And I seen what kind of a situation we was in just real quick. And I turned hard left and grabbed the emergency brake. I locked the rear wheels and turned back right, knocked her out of gear, and threw up my hand. Of course, Tyler he was really on me. He was following real close. And he done the same thing, and then I jumped. I got out of the driver's seat because I figured if he hit me, he T-boned me, at least he wouldn't mash my legs up in it. And old Tyler, when he swung, he done about the same thing I did. The Jeep had a little dust cap on the front wheels, and I felt my Jeep go, just felt a little click, and Tyler clicked me with a dust cap. Now, I'm telling you, that's mighty close to not bending something up. But once we got out to this camp, the guy had to radio it on Morse code because the Army didn't have any radios that would transmit more than just yards. But he could send Morse code quite some distance. And when he got out there, it was a message that had been misinterpreted on one end or the other. So we didn't have anybody to bring back. I was glad of that. And one time we was bringing, I think it was Tree Joe was in the bunch, a really old Tree Joe. And I had a guy that had passed out from lack of water and heat exhaustion. And boy, we was really taking him to the base hospital. It was about 25 miles out in the wilderness. And I was coming down this little bitty old dirt road, just flying. Fast old Jeep would run. And Tree Joe says, "Stop, he's dead." Well, we didn't notice it, but the colonel was approaching, coming towards us down that little road, and he seen us just slide to a halt, and we threw this guy out of the Jeep, just really threw him like a sack of feed, throwed him on the ground, and we started pounding on his chest and artificial respiration and this, that, and the other, and he started breathing again. God damn, we just throwed him right back up in the Jeep and took off and never paid that old man any attention. He got a little upset with us and turned us in. But there's one time the captain told him what we was doing. We didn't have time for no military courtesy and going through the question and answer detail. I was thinking of something. Oh, yeah, one time Miss Keller had a kidney stone attack, and I'd never been around anything like that, and I did halfway realize that if you could give a guy some morphine, that would relax the urinary tract and all of that, and he could usually pass the stone. And this Craig C. Wales said to Trejo, he said, we happened to be at where an old building and an old barn was there, and there's a piece of tin laying around there, and he said, urinate on this tin. And of course, old Trejo, he's kind of nuts anyway, he started laughing. And he said, that's an order. Piss on that tin. Well, you know, a feller could get a lot of orders, but he very seldom ever has an order such as that. So old Trejo, he just whipped her out and he peed on that tin, and he said, now that's it. There ain't no more. Of course, you know, nobody out in there could pee very much because there just wasn't drinking any water. And the main objective of that captain wanted him to do that was so Keller could hear water running, and that would make him want to urinate. Well, that wasn't really his problem. He was just giving birth to a concrete block, and it wouldn't have made no difference if he'd have heard water running out of a fire hose. He still couldn't have done anything. So we gave him a shot of morphine, put him in that old Jeep, and took him to the base hospital. And he was back in 3 or 4 days. But that was back in the days before penicillin, and if you got an infection of any kind, you just had to fight it on your own. We did have sulfa drugs. And by staying out in the wilderness like that, we had a very low rate of VD. But if a guy got VD back in those days, in 42 and 43, and most of 44, whatever rank he had, he immediately lost that. And it was a long, drawn-out process on that treating VD. I don't remember what all you had to do, but it was something else. Let's see, I got to think of something else. I remember one night that I had to go over to the orderly room and report to the first sergeant. First sergeant said, Thursday night next week you fight. And I said, Thursday night next week, you crazier than hell. But the first sergeant didn't like me, obviously, and I didn't like him. So he arranged this fight. It was really a series of fights within the division to see who's the best men in a certain weight class. And they paired me off with a guy that weighed 180 pounds. And they was going by my weight when I came into the service. I only weighed 155 or so right then, 57. But this guy wasn't a fighter, and I got tickled at him and wasn't paying no attention, and damn if he didn't hit me. Boy, I mean, he just all but blew my lights out. And the next day, my jaw was just all swelled up and hurt, and I went down to the first aid station, or what we called a dispensary. And we had a doctor there from Mississippi. He was a wonderful old man, too damned old to be in the Army, and really the only doctor that we ever had. And he wanted to know what I needed, and I said I was in a fight last night, and I think that old boy broke my jaw. And he put his hands and fingers around in there, and he said, no, sir, boy. He said he didn't break your jaw, but he sure bent hell out of it. And that day for dinner, my goodness, it was the only time in the 3 years I was in, we had steak. And I couldn't chew it at all. I had to trade my little measly piece of steak for some old hard bread, and I soaked it in coffee, and that's what I lived on, was coffee-soaked bread and a few mash things I could get down for till I could get my jaw to working. Well, right after I came home in June and got married, well, when I went back, June of 43, I come home on furlough, got married, June the 12th. And I went back, the outfit had pulled out, so my stuff was all chunked in the barracks there. So I rolled a full field pack, and then I walked down to the MPs and told them who I was, and I couldn't find my outfit. And they looked at my furlough papers and everything. They said, well, we know where they're at. And I said, well, take me out there. And they said, well, sure, we'd be glad to. And I looked, what's the speedometer? It was 27 miles out there. But see, I'd been on board train for over 3 days with nothing to eat. I didn't get any supper that night. The next morning when we got up, I got a half a piece of French toast and a half a cup of coffee. And they told us, he said, now, for everybody that makes that 27 miles without a bobble, no questions, and we would got in there on Thursday night, I believe it was. They said, we'll give you Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off. You'll get a 3-day pass. My God, it was so hot. And people was just almost dying. It was so hot. It was 110, 112 degrees. But everybody hung on, and we made it. Well, when Friday come, we had hopes of all getting a pass, you know. Nothing doing. They said, now we can't go until you wash the barracks and all the equipment. Well, that took all day. Well, we said, well, maybe we can still get 2 days out of it. They said, no, there's no way till we have a full field inspection on Saturday morning. Well, they didn't have that until about 11 o'clock. Well, they said, well, hell, we can get a day and a half out of it. They said, no, you can't have anything until we have an officers' meeting. Well, when they had the officers' meeting, we knew we was cooked. They said, everything's been canceled. Roll up your pack, and we're going back to the field. Well, this is the way the damned Army operated. As far as I'm concerned, anybody that wore bars, stars, or oak leaves or whatnot was nothing but a goddamn liar, just pure and simple. They knew the truth, but they wouldn't tell it, so they just dragged you on, and they had you in a position where you were actually a prisoner of your own country anyway, so you didn't have any damn say-so about nothing anyway. But I did get just so damn tired of being just jacked around, and all of us were the same way. We're just the most miserable damn people in the world to start with, because food and our sanitary conditions were just terrible. And to give you a little idea of how hard it was to make 40 miles or even 40 plus miles was if you carried a pocket knife in your pocket, the pocket knife would eventually wear all the skin off your leg. You'd have a big sore about 4.5 to 6 inches long and about 2 inches wide. So you couldn't carry anything in your pockets that would bounce or touch your leg. And even the cheeks of your butt rubbing together would rub your butt raw. I never believed that. But just little simple things like that, you know. A wrinkle in a pair of socks would just burn a hole right through your foot.